Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Queen Elizabeth, A Day in Her Life. In our last episode, the king went to Malta to visit the armies that were there. He got to meet Eisenhower and the English armies, and Princess Elizabeth was becoming friendly with Prince Philip, and the royals were hiding their precious artwork from the Germans who might invade. Let's see what they're up to today. Princess Elizabeth took a liking to Prince Philip, and her parents had some concerns. Her age was the number one factor. Prince Philip was the nephew of King Constantine of Greece, but he was closely related to the British royal family. His maternal grandmother, Victoria, Marchioness of Milford Haven, was Queen Victoria's granddaughter and lived in Kensington Palace. Both she and her mother, Princess Alice, were born in Windsor Castle. His father, Prince Andrei of Greece, was King George V's first cousin. Prince Philip was born on Corfu, but when he was only 18 months old, his parents had to flee with him and his 4 elder sisters on a British warship. There was a Greek revolutionary court that had sentenced his father to death. The family lived outside of Paris. By the early 1930s, the prince's parents had drifted apart. His mother developed psychiatric problems and then sought solace in religion, while his father based himself in Monte Carlo. The young Prince Philip continued to see each of his parents and spent a good deal of time in Germany with his sisters, who had all married German princes. He went to a preparatory school in Chern in Surrey, then to Salem in Germany. When the educator was driven out of Germany by the Nazis in 1933, he founded a new school, Gordonstoun, in northeastern Scotland, and Prince Philip became a pupil. The prince flourished there. He set high standards for himself and for others. Hahn summarized Prince Philip's character, saying, "He was a born leader, but will need the exacting demands of great service to do justice to himself. His best is outstanding. His second best is not good enough." In January 1940, after passing out of the Royal Naval College at Dartmouth, having been awarded the King's Dirk as best all-around cadet of his term, he began a distinguished career in the Royal Navy. He was good at war, and he was on the HMS Valiant, and he had enabled the sinking of 2 Italian cruisers. In December 1943, the King and Queen held a small dance for their daughters at Windsor Castle. The Queen was impressed by the good behavior of the young men. Princess Elizabeth, though, she was disappointed that Prince Philip had the flu and was confined to bed in Claridge's. The Queen said, "Of all gloomy places." So in the end, he was well enough to come to the pantomime, and he stayed the weekend after it, and they all laughed together. He spent Christmas with them, and Princess Elizabeth said, "We had a very gay time with a film, dinner parties, and dancing to the gramophone." Tommy LaSalle noted that they frisked and capered away till near 1 a.m. Prince Philip was good-looking, and he had strong character and was full of opinions. The Queen was a bit like that herself, and he soon realized that she might not always appreciate his exuberance. He wrote her a thank-you letter after Christmas of 1943, and he said he hoped that his behavior didn't get out of hand. The young prince and the Queen had been talking about what he should do next. He told the Queen, "In thinking it over, I've come to the conclusion that you were right, and that if I had the freedom to choose, I should stay in this country and not go to America." After another visit to Windsor, Prince Philip told the Queen how much he loved being with them. Early in 1944, Queen Mary heard a rumor that the King of Greece was planning to suggest his cousin, Prince Philip, as a possible suitor for Princess Elizabeth. Queen Mary thought Prince Philip was in some ways very suitable. The king liked him too, but according to Queen Mary, wondered if an Englishman through and through might not be more popular with the people of Britain. Queen Mary wrote to the king, hoping that he would not think her interfering. "But as you know well, I adore Lilibet, and her future means much to me. I am too old to be able to expect to see much of it." The king thought that Prince Philip was intelligent and had a good sense of humor, and he thought things through in the right way. But he and the Queen thought that their daughter was too young for that now. She had never met any young men of her own age. Queen Mary was relieved as she said, "Elle is much too young, and after all, the country will have to have a say in the matter, and P sounds extremely nice." The King and the Queen didn't try to discourage Prince Philip and Princess Elizabeth and their growing friendship. Princess Elizabeth took on more public duties, especially after her 18th birthday. That was in April 1944. To her mother and grandmother's delight, she now became a counselor of state. Usually you have to be 21, but the king asked Parliament to amend the Regency Act of 1937, and they agreed to it. She went with her parents on official appointments and started to carry out engagements on her own. In the spring of 1944, the Queen wrote to her mother-in-law that she was getting exhausted by the immensity of battlefields stretching across the world and the great amount of misery caused by the Germans, and she wanted a true peace to this poor, suffering world. When it was the King's birthday, Queen Mary sent him greetings and sympathy over the terrible war, which never seemed to end, and which gave him endless work in so many different ways. Queen Mary thought it was far, far worse than the previous war. The king replied that he hoped very much that the war would end in 1944, as everybody was getting worn out with work and anxiety. The D-Day invasion happened on June the 5th, 1944. By the end of the month, almost 8,000 Allied soldiers had been killed, more than half of them American. Both the king and Churchill wanted to accompany the invading troops, and the Queen had encouraged the king to go, but Lascelles was appalled and talked the king out of it. Then the king and Churchill had a fierce argument because the king told the prime minister he shouldn't go either. Churchill gave way, but with bad grace. On the night of D-Day, the king made a broadcast to the country. The Queen said the king should give the speech and not the prime minister. The king took a great deal of trouble, and the Bishop of Lichfield helped craft the words, and Lionel Logue helped him to deliver the speech. He reminded the people of Britain of what they had suffered and achieved so far. Know once more that a supreme test had to be faced, and he asked everyone throughout the land to take part in a worldwide vigil of prayer as the Great Crusade sets forth. 10 days later, June 18th, the invasion had proceeded well. The fighting was now far enough inland for the king to be able to cross the channel to Normandy beaches, and he spent the day with General Montgomery. The Queen was at church on the 18th, and the Allies were pushing further into France. The Queen said she let a tear leave her eye, thinking of the sorrows of so many good, brave people and feeling unhappy for them. And she then felt a small hand in hers, and the anxious blue eyes of Margaret Rose, wondering what was the matter. When she held her daughter's hand, she remembered the same situation happened with her mother during World War I. The Queen had looked up at her mother in church and saw tears on her cheeks and wondered how to comfort her. She had 4 sons in the army and was so brave. That same morning, as the Queen and Princess Margaret were praying together, death came to another church in which they had worshipped, the Guards Chapel and Birdcage Walk. Hitler had just launched his latest weapon against Britain, the pilotless V-1 bomber. These robotic machines were described as flying bombs and came to be known as Doodle bugs. They made a growling noise like an ill-tuned motorcycle, and they flew 400 miles an hour in a straight line from launch sites across the channel until their engines cut out. Then they fell to earth, causing massive explosions and built-in areas severe damage. When people would hear the engine stop, they knew it was going to explode somewhere, and they would throw themselves under tables, into doorways, and down cellar steps. And they came in swarms of thousands. One day, Churchill broke off his argument with President Roosevelt at the moment a flying bomb was approaching the dwelling. He continued his dictation regardless, and then added the bomb had fallen some ways off, but others were reported. And one of the Doodle bugs passed over the House of Parliament and then Buckingham Palace. And on June 18th, a V-1 engine cut out just after it had crossed the Thames, and it fell between Parliament and Palace, straight onto the Guards Chapel while the Sunday morning service was being conducted. The nave of the chapel was smashed to pieces. The chancel and altar were unscathed, and astonishingly, the candles remained lit. 63 servicemen and women and 58 civilian worshippers were killed. Over 100 more were wounded. Many of those who died that morning were known by the king and the queen. After 4 years of war, the queen felt, like many others, that the Doodlebugs were an infernal new punishment. The queen, fearing the worst, wrote a letter to Princess Elizabeth in case she got done in by the Germans. She left her own things to be divided between her and Princess Margaret, and offering advice on how her jewelry might be shared. She wrote, "Let's hope this won't be needed, but I now know that you will always do the right thing, and remember to keep your temper and your word, and be loving, sweet Mummy." And the king felt the danger, too, and wrote a longer letter to the Princess Elizabeth, explaining provisions of his will. Churchill was appalled by the destruction and death of the bombs. He considered using non-lethal poison gas on the launch sites, and even on the cities of Ruhr. When that option was rejected, the only other defense was to shoot the flying bombs down over Kent and Sussex before they reached London. The poor areas of the south and the east of London suffered most from the new bombardment. The king and queen visited victims in Lambeth on June 29th, and the queen got mad when she was refused permission to visit other areas hit by flying bombs. Tommy Lascelles told her the government was trying to conceal from the Germans where exactly their bombs were falling. If she or the king visited the sites, the Germans would hear about it and would be able to adjust the trajectories in order to hit more built-in areas. The queen then understood. The king once more went to the front, this time to Italy. It would be a 10-day trip. He would see General Alexander, and from July 23rd until August 3rd, he visited battlefields old and current, watching fighting and artillery bombardments. The king wrote his wife, "My darling angel, as I am going away tonight on a journey by air, I feel it is always wise to put one's affairs in order. I'm not thinking that something might happen to me while I'm away from you, but there are some matters which you might want clearing up." He said that she would naturally go on living at Buck Pal in this castle, Sandringham, and Balmoral for the present until such time as Lilibet is on her own. Hope, Royal Lodge, Appleton, and Burke Hall will always be your house on the private estates. The former is our house, the house we built and made for ourselves in Windsor Park. On the evening when the king was leaving, the Queen and Princess Elizabeth drove with the king to North Holt Aerodrome to see him off. The Queen tried to hide her fears from the king, and she said the king feels so much not being more in the fighting line, and she knew that it helped out troops, and she swallowed her anxieties. While the king was away, the Queen and the first-time Princess Elizabeth acted as counselors of state. The Queen kept busy visiting the Girl Guide and Rangers camp at Frogmore and the ATS units at Bagshot, Aldershot, and Windsor, as well as the 2nd Battalion of Home Guard under the command of her brother Mike. The king wrote to the Queen from the General Alexander's headquarters in Italy and said he was having a very interesting time, seeing a lot of lovely hot weather. It's a bit too hot for him, and he dressed in shorts and a shirt. He had seen the Air Force, the U.S. Army, and the Poles. He said he woke up at 6:30 a.m. and bathed in the lake with Alex. He said Alex was a charming host and had told him a lot of his thoughts. He said he had been away for a week and it felt like he had been gone for 10 years. He said he hoped she wasn't too lonely. The Queen wrote him back and hoped that the tum-tum-tummy was behaving nicely and not revolting at the climate or the Chianti or the macaroni or spaghetti. She was cheered by his letter, and she told Tommy Lascelles that she could tell everything was going to be all right. The king returned the day before the Queen's birthday, which was the 4th of August. Queen Mary and other members of the family contributed to a Fabergé cornflower for her. She loved it and thought it was so beautifully unwarlike. Queen Mary decided not to come over from Badminton to celebrate. She was concerned that if she met a robot plane, the shock would give her an allergic reaction. The Queen thought Queen Mary was wise. Being at Windsor, there were constant warnings and explosions on the afternoon of her birthday. She wanted to get the children away from Windsor because life was rather unnormal. The liberation of France had begun, and the Queen was anxious for the end of the bombing of London. Paris was freed August 1944. The beginning of November 1944, the Queen learned that her father, who had been suffering from an attack of the flu, was gravely ill. She made plans to take the night train to Glamis and telegraphed her younger brother David at the British Embassy in Washington. David had planned to go there at once, but Lord Strathmore died peacefully in his sleep November the 7th. David decided not to fly home when all was over, and because of the wartime circumstances. The Queen had a simple funeral for her father. Lord Strathmore's coffin was covered with a Union Jack flag. His coffin was drawn to the burial ground on a farm cart by 2 horses, while pipers from the Black Watch played Flowers of the Forest. The king walked behind the coffin with the other men of the family, and the Queen followed in a car with her sisters. She wrote to Churchill thanking him for his sympathetic letter, saying it was a very sad moment for all of us. My father loved us and we loved him, and it was so comforting for me to go home. I felt that I was loved, and even now, with old age coming on, that I was a loved child. That is gone, but I'm grateful to have had it so long. So I'm going to stop the video here. In this episode, we saw how Prince Philip started to work his way into the royal family because he liked Princess Elizabeth. The family liked him, but didn't like that Princess Elizabeth was too young. Then we heard about the Doodle bugs, which sounded pretty scary, bombs with no pilots, with them crashing into whatever they could. The king went to Italy to see the troops there, and there was good news about France being liberated, and the Queen hoped it would happen for London too. Then the Queen's father died, and that was a sad occasion, but the Queen was glad she had a loving family for as long as she did. I hope everyone enjoyed the video, and if you did, if you could give it a thumbs up It would be greatly appreciated, and it would help to expand my channel. I have some merchandise listed on my description part of the video, and if you see something you like, just click on the link and it'll take you to the Amazon website. If you decide you want to order something, I'll get a small commission with no extra charge to you. More importantly, I wish everybody a good day, and tune in again soon for another episode of Queen Elizabeth, A Day in Her Life. Thank you. Bye.